Welcome to the Broadway Podcast, the musical theater history podcast where a couple of doctors sit around and talk about Broadway. I'm your co-host, Dr. Kristin Stultz Pressley, joined as I always am by Dr. Tracey Brent-Chessum. What are we talking about?
Today we're talking about the Neil Diamond Jukebox musical called A Beautiful Noise. So part of that, turn up the jukebox micromester, as you put it a couple weeks ago.
You really like that word micromester, don't you?
I can't really get it out of my mouth when I try to say it. Can you tell I stumble over it? That's why I keep trying to say it, because I'm like, it's not working in my mouth quite yet, but I love it.
Yep. Well, and this could be a micro episode, especially in comparison with Mamma Mia last week.
Oh, well.
This one may go by a little bit more quickly.
Yes. I mean,
or maybe not.
You've got to take some time and talk about, what Mamma Mia did, and because it does really kind of just kickstart the jukebox is back into kind of their own section of musical theater history. So.
Absolutely. So without further ado, I'm going to jump right into A Beautiful Noise, the Neil Diamond musical. Mm-hmm. And I want to revisit something that we've gone over ad nauseum in these first couple of episodes, this micromester, as it were, and revisit the money component. I talked about how, Mamma Mia made billions of dollars and continues to make money and is now being revived on Broadway and will make even more money. So anybody who has a commensurate catalog of music is, of course, going to wonder what they can do with it and how they can monetize that catalog. So for some of them, it's about making that kind of money. But for other artists, rock artists, who are wanting to turn their catalog into a musical, it's not about the money. They've made their millions, or in some cases, billions. They've sold hundreds of millions of copies of albums, so they don't need the money. For them, it's more about the legacy. How am I going to preserve my legacy? Mm-hmm. I am getting to the end of my touring career. I am possibly getting to the end of my life for some. How am I going to...
From Taylor Swift, I don't own my masters.
There you go.
Because if I don't own them... This is a way to gain some ownership over the catalog. Anyway, keep going.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, it's funny you mentioned Taylor Swift, because just before we started recording this morning, I was thinking, I wonder when she's going to do her Jukebox musical. And oh my gosh, can you imagine how long that will run?
And there will be many more. There'll be more than 3 possible dads. We'll put it that way.
Yes.
In her discussion.
No question. So at any rate, for some, it's about the money, but for others, it's about the legacy. And we see that in the case of shows like Tina, the Tina Turner musical, where Tina was initially resistant to being involved in creating that. It actually had the same director as Mamma Mia, Phillida Lloyd. And she initially was like, I don't really want to have anything to do with this. But then as it, in her mind, it kind of reframed things, she thought, you know what, this is about my legacy. This is about me leaving behind my story of inspiration, of the lowest of lows and the highest of heights, and how that can inspire other women or men, as the case may be, to do the same. And so it becomes more about legacy. To an extent, we see that also with Beautiful, the Carole King musical, where, Carole was very resistant to being a part of that show. Did not even see the show until it was about 3 months old. It had been on Broadway for several months before she even saw it. But now it has become very much a part of preserving the legacy of who she was as a songwriter and is as a songwriter. So a lot of times we see artists retire and they want some kind of a capstone that can preserve the story of their careers. And you're right, it's a way for them to be in control of that narrative, right?
Yeah.
Take back ownership of that. So let me tell you a little bit about Neil Diamond in short. I'm sure he is a man who needs no introduction, but nevertheless, that may be helpful. So let me just give you very broad strokes who he is.
I think he does need an introduction.
Okay.
Only because Neil Diamond is somebody in the American zeitgeist that it's like everybody's heard of, but maybe they can't really tell us anything other than Sweet Caroline.
Right.
It wasn't on everybody's bucket list. Now, my dad listened to two artists growing up. He listened to Kenny Rogers and Neil Diamond. So I know the whole catalog, y'all.
Love it.
That is what we listened to.
Love it.
In the car on our family vacations. All five of us singing Coming to America. I don't know why. But the thing is that I didn't know anything about this man. All I knew is that he was kind of sad. He was like, sometimes he's okay, and sometimes it's like, this is awful and heartbreaking, and what's wrong with you, kind of a thing.
Yes.
So I think he does, he's not somebody who like, everybody knows his story.
Yeah.
And I think that changes how you view the musical.
Yeah.
Because
you're so right. Because
if you don't know what you're walking into, I think that you'd just be like, oh, this isn't what I thought it was going to be.
Right.
Because he's not your typical rock star.
No. And the title, A Beautiful Noise, might lead you to go in expecting something different than what is the reality of the show. Yeah, for sure. And we'll talk about where that title came from in a minute. But yeah, so Neil Diamond, in short, was a Jewish kid. He grew up in Brooklyn, New York. He wanted to be a rock star. It was in the mid-1960s. The Beatles are becoming very, very popular the world over. And Neil Diamond wants to be a part of that world. And so he gets his start at a club in Greenwich Village called The Bitter End. And he performs there, and that is a big part of his early biography. He was heavily influenced. He was not only a performer and singer, but he was also a songwriter. Of course, we see the late 60s becoming the era of the singer-songwriter. We go from the bands like the Beatles and the Monkees and the Beach Boys, right? The Four Tops and the Temptations. We see the bands, the Jackson 5, give way to the singer-songwriter era. And that's when we get James Taylor and Carole King and all of that ilk, right? And so Neil Diamond is coming around just as the singer-songwriter thing is taking off. And luckily for him, he's able to do both. So he's pretty quickly takes off. But when he was writing, especially his early songs, he was influenced by Broadway. So shows like West Side Story and My Fair Lady and Fiddler on the Roof, these are shows that were, embedded deep into his psyche and definitely influenced him as he was writing, especially those early songs. Again, think about it. He was growing up in and around New York City. I don't know how much theater he actually went to see, but he was certainly surrounded by the billboards and you know what I mean? He was surrounded by that sort of.
And growing up there, I mean, even if you're not seeing them, you've at least heard them.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. And not to mention, a lot of these songs were on the radio still when he was a child. Yeah. Right. We're still getting popular music to a large extent in his early years from the Broadway catalog. So he was definitely impacted by that. So he goes on to great acclaim. Songs like, Tracy's already mentioned Sweet Caroline, but there's Cracklin' Rosie and Forever in Blue Jeans and Song Sung Blue and Love on the Rocks, Ain't No Big Surprise, and Coming to America. And then because I am a Kentucky native, I have to end with Kentucky Woman. So, there were so many hit after hit after hit. In fact, he sold more than 130 million records worldwide. So he's one of the top selling artists of all time. But he had 39 top 10 singles. 39. I was blown away when I saw that number because I had no idea. You're right. People need to know his biography because I had no idea that he had that many hits.
If 39 with him singing or 39 total? Because he sells 39 to the Monkees.
Yes. Now that's a great question. I don't know that. Oh. All I know is he had 39 top 10 singles. You're right. It could have been like he wrote like I'm a Believer, I think, for the Monkees.
For the Monkees.
Yes. So you're right. I could not say. I would be totally spitballing if I tried to guess.
Number one too. So,
yeah.
So
Regardless,
we're not sure. But
we don't know. But whether it is as a singer or a songwriter, he had 39 top 10 singles. He produced dozens of albums. In fact, I saw where all told between original albums and compilation albums and greatest hit albums and all those things, he had almost 80 albums.
Yeah, he did tons.
Almost 80 albums.
He's
mind-blowing.
Very prolific. Very
Yes.
prolific in what he's doing.
Yes. And one of those albums was entitled Beautiful Noise. Yes, that album came out in 1976. And so, of course, that is where the show got its title, from his 1976 album, Beautiful Noise. Now, in addition to recording, he was also one of the most successful touring acts of all time.
Which nobody would really believe.
No. I don't even remember ever hearing of him touring. Do you?
No, I mean, I remember hearing because my dad was like, ooh.
Right. Yeah.
But,
yeah.
I mean, we never went to see him.
Yeah, no. I mean, you think about people touring, you think about, through the 90s, Garth Brooks or you know what I mean? I don't think of Neil Diamond, but in fact, he was one of the best selling touring acts of all time. And in fact, it was when he had to end his touring that he decided to pursue this musical, as we'll get into. He said that he loved touring. He would have done it until the day that he died if his body would have cooperated. So let's get into kind of the beginning. There's a very quick and dirty biography of his life. And then we'll get into, the development specifically of the show, A Beautiful Noise, again, which took its title from that 1976 album. So in 2018, when Neil Diamond was 77 years old, he was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. Now, he was at this point still touring. 77 years old. It reminds me of, and we'll come back to this person in a minute as well, Frankie Valli, who I think he's like 90 something and still on the road. But this is, it's just funny. Have you seen the meme there's been a million different Four Seasons to back up Frankie, but then Frankie's still on the road. There's this meme of like these 33-year-old or whatever Four Seasons giving it all they got. And then out walks Frankie Valli, and God love him, he looks his age, and he's barely even lip syncing.
Yeah.
And the meme that I've seen most often, because I was older when I had my children, is me walking into the, parent-teacher meeting at my kids' kindergarten. And I get it. I feel you, Frankie.
My kids started school last week, and that is exactly how I felt. I was like, oh, dear. Somehow I got old in all of this. I don't remember.
Right. I get it. I feel you, Frankie. Excuse me. So anyway, I digress. So Neil Diamond is, in 2018, he is diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. Of course, that means he has to stop touring. He's in his late 70s. So he is like Tina Turner was when Philida Lloyd approached her about making a musical of her life. He is beginning to think about his legacy. He wanted, it's a way to keep the music alive, right? If you think I'm not out there to tour my music, I'm going to send some proxies out there to tour my music, right? Mm-hmm. And that way my catalog won't die, even if I do, which is, pretty smart. Mm-hmm. Well,
especially
fortunately,
if you know about his background, like he changed. It seems like every time he put out a new album, it was with a new record company. Yeah. So his records are everywhere.
Yeah.
So, this is a good thing to kind of try to be like, everything has to be in one place.
Yeah, right. Assemble it all. And one of the points of consistency, not in all of his albums, but in several of them, was a producer named Bob Gaudio. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Bob Gaudio had produced several of Neil Diamond's albums in the 70s, kind of at his zenith. And Bob Gaudio is a name that's probably familiar to listeners of this audience because he was one of the original Four Seasons. I've already mentioned Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons, but he was one of the original Four Seasons. He was the writer and producer of the Four Seasons' biggest hits. He was a key player in the development of Jersey Boys, the musical. And so Bob Gaudio is an important piece of this beautiful noise puzzle. As Neil Diamond is learning about his Parkinson's disease and he's coming to terms with, okay, I can't tour anymore. What can I do to be sure that my legacy is preserved, that my music outlives me? What can I do? Well, he remembers Jersey Boys and he's a big fan of Jersey Boys. And then he remembers, wait a minute, I'm also a friend of Bob Gaudio's, my old producer. So he calls up his old producer. They weren't, best of friends, but nevertheless had a relationship. And he calls up Bob Gaudio and he says to him, hey, can I get one of those? Meaning a jukebox musical of my life?
How do I get one of those musical things?
Exactly. You got any more of those musicals? And so Bob Gaudio was, of course, the perfect person to ask about that. And so Gaudio says, well, if you're serious, let me work on it. And so Gaudio, against being, up in age himself, I think he was probably in his early 80s at this point, says, give me a little time. And he starts to work on how the songs might sound in the context of a piece of musical theater. We talked in the Mamma Mia episode about how it's very different writing for pop music and writing for musical theater music. So Gaudio started to play around with, okay, if I am going to turn this into a musical, what might that sound like? And his studio now is in Nashville, Tennessee. And so he got to work and came up with some different demos of what it might sound like. Mm-hmm. And so the musical is announced in 2019. Gaudio continues to work. And then in early 2020, he plays some of those demos for Neil. And Neil was like, sounds good to me. Let's do it. Let's go. Yeah, let's go with it. And so once that green light was lit, of course, work begins in earnest. And Bob Gaudio acts as a producer on the show, but he brings in a co-producer named Ken Davenport. And anyone who is studying modern musical theater is probably very familiar with Ken Davenport. He started as a company manager in the early 2000s on shows like Thoroughly Modern Millie. And then he becomes a producer. Most recently, he's produced shows like Smash, on Broadway, Operation Mincemeat. He did the Audra McDonald revival of Gypsy, The Play That Goes Wrong, one of the funniest nights in the theater you could ever have. Spring Awakening, he produced, as well as a number of other shows. So he's working often in and around Broadway and has for the last 2 decades. He comes in to join Gaudio as a producer as the development is taking shape. And of course, they have to bring in a director. So they bring in Michael Mayer. Now, Michael Mayer is a name that's probably familiar to most listeners to this podcast. He's brought in to direct. He's been working a lot like Ken Davenport's. He's been working since the late 1990s. His first gig as a director was with You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown. That was the revival that starred Roger Bart and Anthony Rapp and Kristin Chenoweth. She won her first Tony Award for that role, Miss Sally Brown. And then he directed that. He directed Thoroughly Modern Millie. He directed Spring Awakening. Are you hearing some overlap between Davenport and Michael Mayer? He did the Funny Girl revival with Beanie Feldstein, and then he is directing, because everything comes full circle, to Mamma Mia, the upcoming revival of Chess, which we talked about in our Mamma Mia episode.
Those last 3 examples, and I know that he's done more than these examples, but they are not the Good Men Charlie Browns. They are not the Thoroughly Modern Millies. The last part of his career has been very, very deep, introspective stuff.
Yeah,
like Spring Awakening and Funny Girl and Chess, and so he's making a name for himself now as somebody who can make the introspective work for Americans.
Yes, Yes. And as we have discussed, we sometimes need a little extra help.
Help with the introspective. I know. Oh, we're like, oh, this is too heavy for us. I can't do it. Right?
Yes. Exactly. So it's ironic given how frustrated we talked about in last week's episode, how frustrated Benny and Bjorn, the writers for ABBA, were with American audiences. It's ironic that Michael Mayer is the one directing the chess revival, given your comment just now that he helps us. He gives us the spoonful of sugar to help the medicine go down, right?
Yeah, and he finds a way for us to not feel like, oh gosh, I'm getting too emotional. I need to get out of here. You know?
Yeah. So they've got...
Sorry, I'm musing things. Can you tell?
No, keep talking. I love it.
No, just as so much about this particular show, you know, Kristin did a brief kind of overview of his life, of Neil Armstrong's life. But I mean, as I said at the very beginning, it's not poppy. His life is not a pop song. Sometimes he wrote the pop songs. He could do that. And sometimes life was just fine. But if you look at the history of his life and his relationships, he's even gone on record and been like, this, I love to tour. I wish I could tour more, but that doesn't do great things for my children. That's right.
It wrecked my family.
Yeah, it wrecked his family almost 3 times, or at least twice.
Yes, right.
So I don't know. There's a juxtaposition there that I think is really interesting, and I think that goes back to this particular show and Neil Diamond just as a person. And I think that Michael Mayer found this, and so did the producers, is just this idea that it's like, I can write the pop song. The pop song, sticks in your head, but his voice has so much more depth to it. Mm-hmm. When you listen to him, he's not some high tenor. He's not the Monkees.
Right.
Like, he's not singing like it, and it doesn't just come off like that. There's wisdom and thought, and there's humanity behind it, and to have somebody with his voice singing popish songs, you don't hear that very much. Mm-hmm. And so he's a juxtaposition to begin with. Mm-hmm. Then you put in the juxtaposition of his life being like, he's the biggest touring guy. He's had 39 number 1 hits, which nobody even remembers or even thinks about. But if you start really thinking, going, oh yeah, I remember that one, and I remember that one, and they, you start adding them up. It's like, oh my goodness. Juxtapose that with, how we see him versus, what his life was really like. He's a walking contradiction. And so it's finding that juxtaposition in there that we're gonna find in this particular episode and in this particular show. So I just thought it was interesting looking at Michael Mayer, how you see a juxtaposition happening there, how he's directing things specifically that kind of trouble the narratives, like Spring Awakening, like Funny Girl, like Chess, like things that we that make us uncomfortable. He doesn't mind dealing, he doesn't mind traversing the juxtaposition there. Yes, that liminal space between those two different kind of markers. But anyway, we'll keep talking about it.
Well, sorry. No, but it's that's a great point, and you're right that he was an ideal selection to direct this piece. And in fact, Ken Davenport, his frequent collaborator and colleague, called this a biographical musical drama and not a jukebox musical. We're excited to show people what separates it from some of the jukebox musicals that have been around. And I think that plays into what you're saying. This is, it does fit that mold of, if we talk about jukebox musicals, can go the fantasy route of Mamma Mia, or it can go the biomusical route of Jersey Boys. This is still trying to even distinguish itself from the Jersey Boys mold somewhat. I mean, it's definitely cut from that cloth, but it's trying to distinguish itself to some extent from the mold.
Yeah.
And
I got ahead of myself here. Want to talk a little bit about the screenwriter and what he does with the show, and then it'll make a little bit more sense as to why we're like, this show is different. It's weird. It is, anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. So once they've got in Gaudio Davenport are producing, Michael Mayer is directing, Anthony McCarten, who was a screenwriter, Oscar nominated screenwriter, in fact, is brought in to write the book. And he really seems tailor made for the job as well. He had been Oscar nominated for the screenplay of Bohemian Rhapsody, which was the 2018 film about Freddie Mercury and Queen.
Yep.
So,
Yet another one that traverses the juxtaposition there, doesn't he?
exactly. So he seems like he is, and in fact, I'm sure he was, cherry picked for this role, right?
Yeah.
And even further, just from McCartan's own biography, he grew up in New Zealand and he said that there were two statues on his family's mantle. One was of the Pope and the other was Neil Diamond. So,
Oh, wow. You know what?
so
He was loved. Everybody loved Neil Diamond, but he
yeah,
wasn't. But he's not the Beatles. He's not the one that we
it's
talk about
weird.
now.
I
But I mean,
know.
he was. Yeah, I know
It
the
is weird.
entire catalog. I can
Oh, I'm
still sing
sure.
it for you.
I'm sure. I'm sure. So at any rate, he has brought on Anthony McCarten to write the libretto, and fresh off of that Oscar-nominated screenplay of Bohemian Rhapsody, and it's his idea that comes up with, or he is the one who comes up with the idea to frame the telling of Diamond's story in therapy sessions, and that's what Tracey is alluding to when she talks about just some of the idiosyncrasies of this show. You have two different actors, which has become more and more commonplace, where you have multiple, it's usually three different performers taking on the role so that you can show the whole arc of an artist's life. You have like young Tina Turner and medium Tina Turner and adult, or, wise Tina Turner, or whatever they call her. And that's
Not
becoming more
old.
and more the not right, not old. I
Wise.
would never say that, right? But you see that with the new Dolly Parton musical as well. There's like a
Yes,
10-year-old Dolly and a 25-year-old Dolly and then a 40-year-old Dolly, right?
exactly.
That's becoming more and more the norm. That
Which
certainly didn't happen with Jersey
Dolly is
Boys.
coming, y'all.
She's coming,
It's
ready or
very
not.
quickly.
Here she comes. Here
Back to
she
Neil
comes.
Diamond.
Yes. So it was McCartan's idea. He said, let's frame this, let's bookend this with therapy sessions. So you see Neil Diamond, and we've alluded to kind of some of the difficulties of his life in spite of the music that he was singing and the success that he had. He was still he had some very difficult things to overcome, and he did a lot of this through therapy. So you have in the show older Neil, who on in the original Broadway company was played by Mark Jacoby. Biographical note: he was the first Phantom of the Opera I ever saw on Broadway in 1991. My first Broadway show, Mark Jacoby played Phantom of the Opera. So I'll always get excited to see his name because I will never
I will
forget
remember
that.
that.
Never forget Mark Jacoby. So at any rate, Mark Jacoby plays Neil now, and Neil now is in sessions with his therapist, and he is looking back on kind of the relationships, the family that was destroyed by his career.
Yeah.
And then we also see in the show Neil then played originally on Broadway by Will Swenson.
And I mean, and he got so many lauds. I mean, he sounds
Yes,
exactly like him.
truly,
Yeah,
truly.
we have to give him a lot of credit because poor Will Swenson does not always get a
No,
lot of lauds, but the man can make himself into anything.
truly.
So,
Well, and it's, to prove your point, when I saw Will Swenson, my thought is always, oh, Mr. Audra McDonald, which I'm
yes,
sure he would not mind being called. He
no,
is married to
to
Audra
Audra
McDonald,
McDonald.
but he's a very accomplished and gifted performer in his own right. And then if we're going to talk more about the 6 degrees of Audra McDonald, Mark Jacoby, who was my Phantom,
Yeah.
was father in Ragtime when
Yes.
when Audra was Sarah Brown Eyes, opposite Brian Stokes Mitchell in Ragtime. So
Cheapers.
I could go on and on. I love that show,
We could keep going, y'all.
particularly that first production. And speaking of being revived on Broadway, Ragtime is back as well.
Okay.
Again, okay, so I'm gonna
We
take
are,
a
can
breath.
you tell we're really very much trying not to bunny trail on this one because the last one was so long. We're really trying to hold on to ourselves and,
And failing.
yeah, well, yeah.
Okay, so Neil then was played originally on Broadway by Will Swenson, and older Neil now is played by Mark Jacoby, originally on Broadway, and he is looking back on the life of Neil then, right? So basically, you have Will Swenson performing all of these iconic numbers in performance, right? And then you have Mark Jacoby as Neil now, sitting in a therapist's office, looking back, unpacking, deconstructing all of the things that led to the dissolution of two marriages, right?
Yeah. And songs like Love on the Rocks.
Right. Exactly.
Which is, it's profound. Talk about this, you've got all the poppy songs, and then there's this big split in them. And then there's like Love on the Rocks, and there's
big surprise.
All of these different,
yes,
songs that are just like, what's the one he did with Barbra Streisand?
You Don't Send Me Flowers Anymore?
Is that what it was? Flowers anymore. And it's like, this is awful. What is wrong with it? I just remember being like 12 in the back of the Astro van listening to this and going,
Astro van.
What is wrong with this man and this woman? They need to go to therapy wasn't a thing then, but it's like, obviously you're hurting one another. Stop it.
Yes. Yep. You're so right. Anyway. So therapy, that motif was very familiar to Diamond, and he was instantly like, I love that, because he had not shied away from his own therapy, and the fact that he had been in therapy for years, and so he was very happy to expose, well, I say very happy. He wanted the truth of his life to be told. It was difficult for him to see, but nevertheless, he wanted the truth to be told. So he was willing. Happy's the wrong word. He was willing to tell the whole story, but he acknowledges that it was painful.
And it humanizes him. If they had just told the story without the therapy, without his reflection going, wow, I really messed up there.
Yeah.
And being like, oh gosh, how do I work through this now? Like, without that, it does just look like the humanity that we heard in his songs is not there anymore, right, unless you have both of those pieces. So brilliant decision.
Yeah. So this production, it is astounding. I mean, listeners to this podcast, or regular listeners, will know that these musicals take a long time to mount. This one
this one.
startlingly fast. Yeah. So this one, the idea is hatched in the head of Neil Diamond with his Parkinson's diagnosis in 2018. 2019, the show is announced. 2020, Gaudio plays some demos for Diamond, and they proceed. And then by 2022, they're ready for their premiere in Boston. So the show premieres with a limited engagement in June of 2022 at the Emerson Colonial Theater. Boston has always been one of the places where shows have tried out, but it seems like more and more with the American Repertory Theater in Cambridge and Diane Paulus's leadership there's more and more shows that are trying out in Boston, that are having their world premieres in Boston. Moulin Rouge actually had its world premiere at the same theater, the Emerson Colonial Theater. As did, interestingly enough, the original production of Porgy and Bess in 1935. So, again, tryouts in Boston is nothing new, but it does seem like we're seeing it more and more. Again, I think the American Repertory Theater, we've seen Jagged Little Pill there, and Waitress, and Pippin, and the revival of Porgy and Bess, I think it was 2011. We're seeing more and more of it there, but I just think that's interesting. So anyway, having said that, it premiered there in 2022, really, really fast. To get that from an idea to the stage in 3.5, 4 years, that is breakneck speed, it seems to me. So the team was really hoofing it, especially considering that we went through a pandemic.
Yeah. In the middle of it.
Yeah.
And I wonder how much that actually gave them as, like, it depends on kind of where they were as far as, like, the timing of,
Yeah.
where they were in 2020 when everything kind of shuts down. Because if he has stuff to play for Neil and Neil's like, this is great, and everybody's just sitting around with no job, it's like,
that's
okay,
true.
Everybody
They've got the time to do it.
Let's do all of our readings on Zoom. We can't do better than that, so we might as well. So maybe it actually helps speed it up.
That's very possible.
They didn't have to wait for like a production time or anything because they're like, well, we're not going to get that.
Yes. And if I'm not mistaken, I would not swear to it, but I believe I read that initial conversation where Neil heard Gaudio's first demos was January of 2020.
Yeah,
so it would have been pre-pandemic. Right. And then they would have had nothing but time. So that certainly could have aided him. I don't know. It could have been, oftentimes these things are dictated by availability of the director. Maybe Michael Mayer had something else going on, so they had to get it done. That was the case with Phillida Lloyd and Mamma Mia. She had to premiere in the West End by April something of 1999 because she was going to direct. She was already under contract to direct another show. Yeah. So there could have been something like that. Who knows? I don't know the answer to that question, but this is a really quick turnaround time. So it premieres in Boston in June of 2022, and then it opens on Broadway in very early December of 2022 at the Broadhurst Theater. Now, this date coincides with the 50th anniversary of a series of concerts that Diamond did at the Winter Garden Theater. Back to Mamma Mia! Mm-hmm. Winter Garden Theater coincides with the 50th anniversary, which I don't know if that was intended. Maybe that was intended. And so that was the impetus for getting it done so quickly. I don't know.
He was probably trying to get the Winter Garden too, because those concerts were really, really influential and big for him. Kind of, the fact that he could fill the Winter Garden several times. And it was a more intimate venue, but he could sell it out like nobody's business.
Yeah. Well, and also this sounds kind of crass, but I wonder if is it a play too? Is just with these elderly artists, we want to get it sooner so that I can see it and enjoy it,
Yeah, and I think that there's a piece there in the fact that this one is happening much later than all the rest of them, because he's even pre-ABBA. When you think about like where he falls in music history, and so
72, absolutely, yeah.
He is the age of the people who remember his,
right.
His catalog. Say the people who are listening in the back of the Astro van, like literally, they are rapidly getting older.
Yeah.
And it is one of the reasons why I think this particular musical, everybody's like, this is really, really interesting. And I know of him, and I know I should know his music, but I don't know all of it.
Right.
But it's one that you really kind of need to, like, you need to get a CD of his stuff ahead of time if you don't know his catalog, or else you're just going to be kind of lost. It's like, wait, what just happened? Because it's not just full songs. Like, they do like mashups and snippets of things, and it's his audience is aging. I think you're right.
Yeah. So I'm sure that was a play, but you're also right that I bet that 50th anniversary was, like they probably had that circled, and then little did they know that the Music Man revival was going to take the Winter Garden in 2022.
Well, it was because they were supposed to be out by then.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Because of the pandemic. Yeah. I think we just solved that problem. I think we just figured it out. Okay. I bet that's what happened. Anyway, you heard it first here, folks. So at any rate, the show opens December, I think it was 3rd or 4th, 2022 at the Broadhurst. And opening night, after Will Swenson takes his bow, he points his arms up to one of the box seats, and Neil Diamond stands up and leads the audience in a verse and chorus of Sweet Caroline. And, as I watched that, you can see it on YouTube. And as I watched it, I thought, man, that had to be one of the great highlights of his life, especially since he hasn't been able to tour for the past 4 years at that point. He was not singing in front of an audience anymore. That had to be enormously gratifying to be able to do that. Mm-hmm. So I love that moment for him. I was very happy that he got to have that, even though I have never met him and will never meet him.
No.
Nevertheless, I was so happy for Neil Diamond in that moment. You can see that on YouTube, like I said. So, at any rate, the show premieres. As always, this is always the case with jukebox musicals. Reviews are mixed.
Yeah.
But interestingly, I mentioned that Davenport, the producer, had called it, he really wanted to show that it was not your traditional biomusical. He really made the point of stressing that it was separate from some of the jukebox musicals. And Variety did pick up on that. It wrote in its review that the show does not exactly play by all the rules of jukebox theater. It unfolds first as a hit parade within a dramatic retelling of Diamond's 1966 beginnings in Act 1, followed by a second act of sequined post-1960s concerts spliced with marriage and lonely childhood, and then a denouement of hardcore emotional resolve. So it is difficult. This ain't Mamma Mia. And it's not even Jersey Boys, because while Jersey Boys tells some difficult parts of the story, it's still a pretty emotional high, right? Mm-hmm. Like that music, you're still pretty emotionally high. And in this sense, you feel a lot more of the highs and lows of Diamond, because we do get to see so much of his humanity in the show.
Yeah. It's just, I mean, talk about it being mixed. The more and more you read of it, it's like, it's a little bit of everything. And I think that it comes back to making sure that folks know what they're walking into.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you just say, oh, I'm going to see a musical called A Beautiful Noise, but you have no idea who Neil Diamond is. Right. This is not going to resonate with you in the same way.
Right.
Right? Because you're not going to understand the sacrifice, because you didn't get to experience what he was sacrificing for. Like, I think that there's a little bit of that. I think that Davenport had a point in trying to separate it from the bio musicals, but I think they made really, really interesting choices. It's still a bio musical. Yeah. And I think that, they all kind of pick up on that. They're like, look, I see that they're trying to do something different, and the way in which they've structured it is very different, and we need that in any kind of structural development. And, musical theater / jukebox is still very young, I think, as a structural discipline. And so it's like, they made a really, really interesting choice here that could, help, work with this kind of, new kind of structure. But it's not, we didn't create a third category in any way, shape, or form. So, yeah. Right. And it does feel sometimes like, it does sometimes feel like an old man trying to tell a story. Yes. It really does. And it's like, I need to, nobody knows enough about me, and I don't want anybody telling the story when I'm gone, kind of a thing.
Well, and that goes back to what we were saying at the beginning, which is they want to be able to control the narrative of their own legacy and their own lives. And even Diamond said, as after the show premiered, he said, this musical is how I want to tell my story. Yeah. So while he admits that it was difficult to watch some of it, just as Carole King talked about how it was impossible for her to watch parts of her own musical, so much so that she completely checked out of it until it had been running on Broadway for 3 months. Yeah. He's saying, this is hard, but I wanted it to be warts and all, and this is how I want to tell my story. So the show closed on Broadway in June of 2024. So it had played almost 2 years, a year and a half, and almost 700 performances, 657 performances. I will tell you, that's not a super long run, but in the grand scheme of jukebox musicals, that's actually pretty healthy.
It's decent.
Yeah, it's pretty healthy. When I wrote the book about jukebox musicals, the way that I chose which ones to write about was I took the most popular ones and I looked at the length of their Broadway runs. So I picked the ones, I think the 10 longest running musicals or jukebox musicals, and 657 performances would have not made it into the book, but it would have gotten close. It probably would be 15th on the list.
And I mean, just the, you remember being at the TKTS booth and they're trying to, and they're like, do you want, A Beautiful Noise? And they're like, Sweet Caroline. Everybody knows that song. That's how they're selling it too, because they do. I mean, everybody does know that song.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
And that's, but you do need to, like, I think in order to appreciate this one, you do need to know some background behind it. You do need to understand what you're walking into.
Indeed. And that's why we're here. Different. Yeah. That's why we're here. So that, if you're going to see a show on the way to the theater, you can listen to our episode related to that show. And hopefully it'll help you to understand the show a little bit better. Some of them are pretty easy to understand. Others of them are more nuanced. And that's certainly the case with A Beautiful Noise.
Yeah.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Look at us.
Well, that'll do it.
45 minutes. Do it.
Can you believe it?
I don't think we've ever been this short. Look at us staying on our script and trying very hard not to stray. We did talk about, Delaney Benson once.
She didn't come up at all.
Nope.
She did not come up at all.
This is very good for us. Hilarious.
All right. Before we say something we'll regret, I'm going to cut us off and say that'll do it for this episode of the Dr. Broadway podcast. Tune in next time. We'll be talking about Hell's Kitchen, which played the Public Theater in 2023 and opened on Broadway in 2024. Until then, you can connect with us via email at hello@drbroadway.com or on Instagram, YouTube, or TikTok at Dr. Bway.